The purpose of this short video is to introduce some of the basic concepts and terms with respect to ecology. The place I'd like to start is by defining ecology. I'm going to define ecology as the study of interactions between organisms and their environments. The key here is interactions, because these interactions between organisms and their environment will actually define the abundance and distribution of a species on the planet. Ecology has many levels of study. The simplest is the study of the organism, where we would study the physiology of the organism, looking at acclimation and adaptation to its environment. If we put collections of organisms together, that is, individuals of the same species in the same geographic area, we will form a population. Population ecology looks at the interactions of populations or groups of individuals, population growth, etc. If we take populations and put them together into a workable group, a cluster, we'll have a community. Think of a forest with trees and shrubs and wildflowers, birds and insects and mammals. That's a community. If we take the community and include the environment, the physical environment, the biological environment, and the interactions, we will have an ecosystem. Ecosystems will be juxtaposed to one another in the environment. For instance, a lake next to a forest, which might be next to a prairie or a grassland. As you do that and build one ecosystem next to another, that's the purview of landscape ecology. And then if we take all the landscapes and all of the ecosystems and put them together that are on the planet, we have the living aspect of the planet called the biosphere. One item that's not mentioned here is the biome, and a biome, in my mind, is synonymous with an ecosystem. It's just an extended ecosystem over a large geographic area. So you have the northern deciduous forest, you have the tundra, the taiga. Those are ecosystems spread over large geographic areas. So we put these together, going from the smallest, organismal, to the largest, the biosphere, and we have the study of ecology. What we'll see as we layer these from one level to the next, that the increased complexity brings interactions that become important and work as sort of a having a synergistic effect on the organisms themselves and the groups of organisms in which they find themselves. Now, because ecology studies the interactions and interrelationships, the environment becomes very important. And we divide the environment into two parts, that is, abiotic and biotic. The abiotic portion of the environment is the physical portion, the solar radiation, the soil, the water, the energy transfer, the wind, the pH. The biotic aspect of the environment are the interactions between organisms, predation, competition, herbivory, parasitism, how one organism or group of organisms interacts with another. I want to show you how first biotic and then abiotic factors may influence the distribution of a species. I'm going to start by looking at a tidal pool. Now, if you recall, a tidal pool would be just a depression in the coastal area, intertidal coastal region of the continent, where at high tide they are obscured or submersed by water, and at low tide they're exposed, but they're small pools or collections of water at this coastal region. Within these tidal pools, often you get lush growth of algae and seaweed. And if you have plants, algae and seaweed, you're going to get herbivores. That is, in this case, sea urchins that will eat the seaweed, and an organism known as a limpet, which is a snail-like organism which will also eat the algae. So I'm going to tell you, based on these tidal pools and the herbivores and the algae, that a study was done many decades ago, actually, in the 1980s, so it's pretty old, but it's what we'll call a classic experiment, in which the investigators went to these tidal pools, found some tidal pools that they kept as controls, some tidal pools that they removed the limpets, some tidal pools that they removed the sea urchins, and some tidal pools from which they moved both these sea urchins and the limpets, and they consequently looked at how the algae or seaweed growth changed with the presence or absence of these various combinations of herbivores. I'm going to give you a second to look at this graph. If you'll see, the x-axis is simply a time frame of when they sampled. The y-axis is the percent cover of seaweed in the particular tidal pool, and then the lines represent the various treatments of the experimental design. So take a moment and look at this. Okay, I know I didn't give you a lot of time, but what I want to do is call your attention to the area down near the x-axis where you see a red and a blue line. You'll see that the red line is the control, which means that at that point that was just a tidal pool in which there were both limpets and sea urchins present. And you see you got very little seaweed growth in those because presumably these animals were consuming the seaweed. But you notice that in those pools where the limpets only were removed, there was no significant difference between those pools with no limpets and the pools that had both urchins and sea limpets present. The black line right above this is the line which looks at only the sea urchins removed. Here you see there is a large increase, if you remove the sea urchins, a large increase in growth of the seaweeds. It goes up rather dramatically. Again, contrasting with only the limpets, very little change in seaweed growth. Remove the sea urchins, there's a great increase in seaweed growth. Now that would lead us to believe that the limpets didn't play a very big role in this ecosystem of the tidal pool. But the purple line, if you notice, actually the one in which those pools in which both the limpets and the sea urchins were removed, shows a even greater increase in seaweed cover. The idea being that you can see if you look at the purple line as compared to the black line, and then the purple line as compared to the blue line, you see that sea urchins by themselves had a large impact, an increased impact of both species being present. So sea urchins are the main herbivores, limiting the distribution of algae, but with the two of them present, we see an even more dramatic interaction that takes place, and that's often what happens with biotic factors. Let's look at abiotic factors. Here we see, if we think of the physical factors of an environment, we would be talking about things such as temperature, water, sunlight, wind, those sorts of things. And we can see that abiotic factors can have a dramatic impact on the distribution of species, even entire communities or ecosystems. This graph that you see here on this slide looks at, on the x-axis, the mean annual precipitation, and on the y-axis, the mean annual mean temperature, so average temperature. And what you can see is that the figures drawn on the graph indicate the areas in which, that is the combination of precipitation and temperature, that you would get deserts, grasslands, tropical forests, temperate forests, etc. I want to call your attention to two of them, the temperate forest and the coniferous forest. And what I want you to see there is they both, if you project downward to the x-axis, you see they both have pretty close to the same range of mean annual precipitation, but the main difference is simply temperature. In other words, if you have two areas which get basically the same amount of rainfall, but one is slightly warmer than the other, you'll get a temperate forest perhaps in the warmer one, and you tend to get or have a higher probability of getting a coniferous forest in the cooler one. The idea being here, not that this can be for predicting, but what I want you to see here is that mean precipitation and mean temperature are two parameters that have a dramatic impact on terrestrial ecosystems. Let's see how this can also play out in other ways. For instance, here, when we look at rainfall and geography, picking either large mountains or lakes or oceans and how they might affect local environmental conditions. If you look at this diagram, what I want you to see here is you see a diagram that represents mountain ranges, and the red arrows indicate wind direction, and then you see we have some clouds, and the winds are blowing in off the ocean, going over the first set of mountains, being increased in altitude, and then over a second range of mountains to go even higher. And the question is, where would you expect the most rainfall to occur under these circumstances? Well, the answer is that the rainfall is going to occur in the windward side of these mountain ranges. So as the wind blows in, the moisture in the wind is pushed up into the atmosphere, where it chills, condenses, and falls as rain. And as you go up higher and higher in mountains, you're going to get this condensation and rainfall. So on the windward side, you're going to actually get rainfall. On the what's called the leeward side, you're going to get a rain shadow. And these differences in rainfall, as we saw from the previous graph, could have a dramatic impact on the plant community and therefore the animal communities that you would find there, a forest versus a desert or whatever the particular biome or ecosystem would be. So we get the creation of rainfall patterns on the windward side of these mountain ranges and more desert-like or dry conditions on the leeward or opposite side of the mountains. Finally, I want to simply mention the major biomes, or large geographic ecosystems, that we find on Earth. We divide them into aquatic, transitional, and terrestrial. Aquatic ecosystems could be subdivided into freshwater and marine. Freshwater being lower salt content, marine having a high salt content. Freshwater can be divided into those bodies of water which are mainly still, that is, form basins, lentic systems like lakes and ponds, and those in which the major feature is the movement of water, which would be rivers and streams, called lotic systems. So we have lentic and lotic systems. Marine, of course, is the ocean and sea ecosystems. We're not going to say a lot about those in this class because they're very different systems and very diverse systems all to themselves, but I want to mention them here. Then we have transitional biomes or ecosystems, which are those between the aquatic systems and the terrestrial. We'll call those wetlands in the case of freshwater, swamps, bogs, marshes, and estuaries where the marine systems and the freshwater systems come together, and then there's a land there. So we're talking about at the mouths of large rivers like the Chesapeake Bay or Long Island Sound, something like that. And finally, we have the terrestrial systems, which are the land-based systems. And the land-based systems themselves can be divided, again, based primarily on mean or average temperature and mean precipitation. We can categorize tropical forests, savanna, deserts, mountain areas, chaparral, etc. And you see the pictures here, and you've probably come across these in your reading, and you certainly will in the textbook.